Ethan stood on the bustling streets of the alien city, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was part of a small human delegation visiting the planet for diplomatic talks, though he wasn't important enough to be involved in anything of real consequence. He was just a low-ranking officer assigned to keep an eye on things, ensuring the peace between the humans and the aliens. The city was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Tall, shimmering buildings stretched into the sky, their design so sleek and futuristic that they seemed to belong in another world. Alien citizens, some humanoid and others with features completely foreign to Ethan, moved about their day, going about their business with an air of indifference toward the humans walking among them. The air was cooler than usual that morning, and the streets were lined with colorful stalls selling goods from all over the galaxy. The alien market was a marvel, with exotic fruits and strange, unidentifiable objects. The sounds of merchants calling out their wares mixed with the clinking of alien money and the distant hum of hovercrafts passing overhead. Ethan's shift had just started, and he was assigned to patrol the market area. He walked with his hands in his pockets, not really paying attention to the goods around him, more focused on his duty. His role was simple: keep an eye on the crowd, ensure that nothing went wrong, and report any suspicious activity. He wasn't here to make friends or even enjoy the sights. He had done this kind of work on Earth, but being so far from home made it feel different. As Ethan walked along the crowded street, he noticed the temperature dropping even further. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, the cold seeping through the fabric. It was strange. One moment the air had been warm, and now it felt like winter had suddenly arrived without warning. He heard the whir of the air conditioning units turning on in the nearby stalls, trying to combat the strange cold front that had swept in. He continued walking, his boots clicking against the pavement, when he spotted her. She was standing on the edge of a busy marketplace, huddled by a vendor's cart. She wasn't dressed like the other aliens, who all wore their usual clothes made of strange fabrics and metals. This girl, she looked younger than him, maybe in her 20s, was wearing nothing more than a thin robe-like garment. It was strange to see her there, standing motionless in the middle of the crowd. At first, he didn't think much of it, but then he noticed her trembling. Her body shook violently and her teeth were chattering. The cold had clearly taken her by surprise. She was freezing and no one seemed to notice her. Ethan's instinct kicked in. Without thinking, he approached her. People around her paid her no mind, continuing their busy lives, but he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. She was alone, and the cold was too much for her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, his concern evident. The girl turned her head slowly to face him, her wide, glowing eyes meeting his. There was a strange beauty in her face, an otherworldliness that made her stand out from everyone else. Her skin was a soft shade of teal, almost like the color of the ocean at dawn. Her features were delicate but striking, and she looked lost, almost as if she didn't belong there. I can't. Her voice was shaky, and she struggled to form words, her breath fogging in the cold air. Ethan glanced around, unsure what to do. He had no idea who she was or why she was so cold. But one thing was certain: she needed help. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was the best he could offer at the moment. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such a kind gesture. Her face softened, and she muttered something under her breath in a language Ethan couldn't understand. Still, she wrapped the jacket around herself, the warmth of his body lingering in the fabric. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice quieter now, her shivering slowing down. Ethan nodded. "No problem, just try to stay warm." He stood for a moment, watching her adjust the jacket around her, before noticing that the crowd had begun to shift. Some people were staring at them, whispering among themselves. The girl's appearance was unusual, even in a place as diverse as this. She didn't belong to any of the major alien species Ethan had learned about during his brief time here. She looked different. But before he could say anything more, the girl suddenly turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without another word. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her go, unsure if he should follow or if he had just done something foolish. After a few moments, he decided it was best to let her go. It wasn't his job to get involved with every random alien he met. He had a duty to fulfill, and he had just given a stranger his jacket. It didn't feel like much, but it was all he could do at the time. Shaking his head, Ethan continued his patrol. The market was as busy as ever with people haggling and shouting to each other, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. There had been a brief connection with the girl, something that lingered in the back of his mind. Still, he tried to brush it off. It was just a moment. She was just a stranger. Little did he know that the simple act of kindness would change his life forever. The sun had barely risen the next morning, casting a soft golden glow over the city. Ethan was already awake, preparing for another day of routine work. His quarters were small but comfortable, nestled in one of the many high-rise buildings that lined the cityscape. He was stationed in the foreign sector, assigned to monitor interactions between humans and aliens during the diplomatic talks. It was a peaceful job, mostly uneventful, and that suited Ethan just fine. He wasn't interested in fame or attention. He just wanted to get through his assignment and return home. As he sipped his coffee, the quiet of the morning was interrupted by the faint hum of hovercrafts outside. The city was waking up, and so was Ethan. He glanced at the clock on the wall. His shift was about to start. With a deep breath, he finished his coffee, threw on his uniform, and left his quarters. The day felt like any other, the streets busy with people hustling to their destinations. Ethan was assigned to patrol the central plaza today, where the alien market had been set up. It was always crowded, filled with strange vendors selling their goods, some of which Ethan didn't even have names for. As he made his way to the plaza, he couldn't help but think back to the night before, the girl, the freezing cold, and the jacket. It was an odd memory. He'd never met anyone like her before, and the way she had looked at him with such deep gratitude lingered in his mind. He tried to push the thought aside as he arrived at the marketplace, his eyes scanning the crowd as he walked. It was busier than usual. Merchants called out to passers-by, offering strange fruits and colorful textiles. Ethan nodded to a few familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries with the other human and alien officers stationed in the area. He moved toward the corner of the square, where a small cafe had set up for diplomats like himself. He needed a moment to relax before his shift began in earnest. Just as he was about to sit down, a hovercraft landed not far from him. The sleek silver ship was unmistakable. It belonged to the royal family. Ethan watched in surprise as a small procession of well-dressed alien figures emerged from the craft. His first thought was that it was some sort of high-profile arrival for the diplomatic talks, but then he saw her, the girl from yesterday. She was standing at the front of the group, her teal skin glowing in the sunlight. She was wearing a delicate gown that shimmered with intricate patterns that looked like they had been woven from starlight. She was flanked by two heavily armored guards who stood silently at her side, but it was her presence that caught Ethan's attention. Her glowing eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on him, he felt a strange jolt in his chest. He froze. The world seemed to slow down for a moment as their eyes locked. She didn't smile or wave. Instead, she simply nodded, as if acknowledging him in a way that made him feel as though she knew something he didn't. Ethan's heart raced, but he quickly shook off the feeling. He wasn't supposed to get involved with royal figures. His role here was simple: keep watch, ensure the safety of the humans and aliens involved in the talks, and avoid unnecessary attention. But as she passed by, something unusual happened. One of the royal attendants, a tall, imposing alien with a dark cloak, stepped toward him. Ethan tensed. The attendant's eyes were sharp, and his presence felt commanding, as though he was there for something important. "You," the attendant said, his voice deep and serious. "The human who gave his jacket to the princess." Ethan blinked, not sure if he had heard correctly. "Pardon?" "The jacket," the attendant repeated. "The princess remembers you." Ethan didn't know how to respond. The princess. He had no idea that the girl he had helped was royalty. She looked so. Ordinary like anyone else on the streets of the marketplace. But apparently she wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of someone important. The attendant's expression softened slightly. "The princess would like to speak with you. She's waiting in the royal tent." Ethan's mind raced. Speak with him. Why? He barely knew her. He had given her a jacket to keep her warm, that was all. He didn't understand, but the attendant didn't wait for a response. He simply gestured toward the royal tent, where the princess had disappeared into moments earlier. With a hesitant breath, Ethan followed the attendant, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in his stomach. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew that this wasn't an ordinary request. The princess wanted to speak with him. It felt surreal. As they approached the tent, the attendant stopped and turned toward him. You will be given an audience with Her Highness. Do not speak unless spoken to. Follow the protocol. Understand? Ethan nodded quickly, unsure of what to expect. He had read about alien royal customs, but he didn't know the specifics. He wasn't exactly trained for this kind of thing. The attendant entered the tent first, and Ethan followed. Inside, the atmosphere was grand, with rich tapestries hanging from the walls and soft, glowing lights that illuminated the space in an almost ethereal way. The princess stood near the center of the tent, surrounded by a few high-ranking officials. She looked different now, her regal gown sparkling in the low light, her hair flowing gracefully around her shoulders. There was an air of power about her that hadn't been present the day before. When she saw Ethan, her expression softened. For a moment, they simply stood there, locking eyes. The tension in the room seemed to melt away as she spoke. "You came," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "I did not expect you to." Ethan struggled to find his voice. I didn't think it was anything special. I just gave you my jacket." The princess smiled slightly, her eyes reflecting a quiet amusement. It was more than that. A gesture of kindness, in a world where such things are rare. Ethan didn't know what to say. He had no idea how to react to her words. He had never been good with royal figures or politics, but there was something about her that made him feel strangely at ease. "I didn't do it for recognition," Ethan finally said, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "I just wanted to help." The princess stepped closer, her gaze intense. "And that is why you are here. You showed compassion when it was needed. That speaks volumes." Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time since arriving on the planet, Ethan felt as if he might be part of something much larger than himself. Before he could respond, the princess's eyes flickered toward the attendant. She nodded slightly, signaling that their conversation was coming to an end. "Thank you," she said. "You are dismissed. The council will have more to say to you soon." Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure if there was anything else he should say, but the attendant's sharp gaze reminded him that he was no one important here. With a bow, Ethan turned and left the royal tent, still processing everything that had just happened. The encounter with the princess had left him both confused and curious. What did this mean? Why had she taken such an interest in him? He couldn't help but wonder if his life had just taken a turn he wasn't ready for. As he walked back toward his assigned post, his thoughts raced. The princess had seemed genuine, but there was something else, something deeper behind her words. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been pulled into a much bigger story than he could have ever imagined. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the princess as he walked away from the royal tent. His mind buzzed with the words she had said, the calm and measured way she had spoken to him. Nothing about this situation made sense. Why would someone like her, someone of such importance, take an interest in a low-ranking officer like him? The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. He had simply given her his jacket. It was nothing extraordinary, just a simple act of kindness. Yet somehow it had turned into something that was getting harder to ignore. As Ethan continued his walk back to the human quarters, he noticed the usual hustle and bustle of the market. Merchants were shouting, trying to sell their wares to the growing crowd. The air felt warmer than it had that morning, and the sounds of the city were beginning to feel more familiar. But today, it all seemed distant. It felt as though the events of the morning had transported him into another world, one where nothing was quite what it seemed. He stopped for a moment, standing by a fountain in the plaza. He stared down at his reflection in the water, his face looking back at him in confusion. Was he overthinking this? Was it possible that the princess had simply been polite, or was there something more to it? He couldn't be sure. All he knew was that he was caught in the middle of something far beyond his understanding. Just then, his communicator beeped, snapping him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, expecting a routine message or a reminder about his next shift. But what he saw on the screen made his heart race. It was an official message from the Alien Council. "Officer Ethan Taylor, you are requested to join the royal delegation for a meeting in the palace. Your presence has been requested by Princess Arlia. Please report immediately." The message was short and to the point, and yet it left him with more questions than answers. Princess Arlia had asked for him? Why? He had no idea what this meeting would entail, but the fact that he was being summoned by someone of her status was more than a little unsettling. He glanced around, the normalcy of the market suddenly feeling out of place. His feet moved on their own as he headed toward the palace district. the distance between him and the royal palace feeling much longer than it should. His thoughts raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. The palace itself was a breathtaking sight. Towering spires reached toward the sky, and the walls shimmered with an iridescent glow, reflecting the light from the city. The area around the palace was heavily guarded, and as Ethan approached, he felt the weight of the situation press down on him. He had been to the palace before, of course, but it had always been for formal events or as part of a diplomatic delegation. This, however, felt different. This was personal. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. As he entered the palace grounds, he was greeted by a pair of guards who escorted him to a large, ornate door. The door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a grand chamber beyond. Inside, the room was filled with elegant furniture, golden tapestries hanging from the walls, and soft light from glowing orbs suspended in the air. At the far end of the room stood Princess Arlia, her back to him as she stared out the window. Ethan stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The princess turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was no hint of royalty in her gaze, just a sense of calm and something else, something that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm glad you could join me." He nodded, unsure of what to say. "Your Highness," he said, keeping his voice formal, though it felt strange in the quiet of the room. The princess smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was simply being polite. It was a smile that conveyed something deeper, something that Ethan couldn't quite understand. "I've asked you here because I need your help," she said, her tone serious now. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Help? He had no idea what he could offer her. He was just a low-ranking officer, far from anyone of importance in this alien world. "I don't understand," he said, his voice low. "What could I possibly do for you?" Princess Arlia moved closer, her steps light, almost like she was gliding across the floor. She stopped just a few feet in front of him, her expression still unreadable. "It's not about what you can do for me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's about what you've already done." Ethan blinked. "I don't understand." "The jacket," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That simple act of kindness is more than you realize. It's what made me decide to meet you here today. You showed compassion when no one else did. That's rare in this world." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a jacket. I didn't think it was anything special." The princess shook her head. "It was more than that. It's the gesture that matters, not the object. You didn't know who I was, you didn't know my status, and yet you helped me without hesitation. That kind of sincerity is rare, and that's why I wanted to speak with you." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. He had always been taught that in these kinds of situations, one must be formal, respectful, and guarded. But the princess's sincerity, her openness, caught him off guard. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Why me?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "Why did you choose me?" Princess Arlia's eyes softened. "Because you are different, because you are genuine. There are many people in this world, in my world, who only do things for power or influence. But you didn't. You didn't expect anything in return. That's why I asked for you." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't mean to make this into something big. I didn't expect anything." "I know," she said, "but sometimes the smallest gestures have the greatest consequences, and I think you may be more important than you realize, Ethan." The words stung, but Ethan couldn't deny the truth behind them. He had always felt like just another face in the crowd, another officer on duty. But now, in the presence of the princess, he was starting to question everything. Had he really done something significant, something that could change the course of events? Or was he simply caught in a game that he didn't understand? Before he could respond, the princess turned and looked toward the door. "The council will want to speak with you soon," she said, her tone shifting back to one of royal authority. "But for now, I wanted you to know that your actions have not gone unnoticed." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to process everything. He had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. His life had just changed, and he had no idea where it would take him. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to say." Princess Arlia smiled again, a genuine smile this time. "You don't need to say anything, Ethan. Just remember that sometimes a small act of kindness can change everything." With that, she turned away, and Ethan was left standing in the grand chamber, unsure of what to do next. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. He would never be the same. Ethan left the royal palace with his mind in a whirlwind. The princess's words echoed in his head, and no matter how hard he tried to push them away, they refused to leave. "You are more important than you realize," she had said. He didn't understand. He was just a regular guy, a low-ranking officer on a temporary assignment in a foreign world. What could he possibly have to offer someone like her, someone of such importance? As he walked back to his quarters, the city seemed to be moving at its usual pace. The bustling markets were filled with shoppers, the sound of conversations mixing with the hum of hovercrafts overhead. Everything seemed so normal. Yet, for Ethan, nothing felt normal anymore. He spent the next few days going through the motions, trying to act like everything was fine. But the truth was, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling in a direction he couldn't control. The princess had asked for him. Not because of his rank or his position, but because of something as simple as a jacket. That had to mean something, didn't it? The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. Why had the princess been alone in the market? Was it really just a random encounter, or had it been orchestrated somehow? And what exactly did she want from him? Despite all his doubts and confusion, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was at play here. It wasn't just a small act of kindness anymore. It felt like he had been drawn into something much bigger, something he wasn't prepared for. A few days later, Ethan was summoned again. This time, the message wasn't vague like the last one. It came with a clear command: report to the royal palace immediately. "The princess wishes to see you." Ethan felt a sense of dread wash over him. Every time he was called, it felt more like an order than an invitation. But he knew he couldn't refuse. Something about his connection with the princess, however strange it might seem, was becoming impossible to ignore. When he arrived at the palace, a familiar attendant greeted him at the entrance and escorted him to a large chamber. The room was opulent, as usual, with tall windows that overlooked the beautiful city skyline. There was a sense of calm in the air, but it didn't do much to ease Ethan's nerves. Princess Arlia was waiting for him near a grand desk, her back turned as she gazed out the window. The sight of her made Ethan's heart beat a little faster, but he quickly shook off the feeling. She was the heir to the throne, and he was just a soldier. Nothing had changed in that regard. "Ethan," she said softly without turning around, "I'm glad you came." He nodded but said nothing, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't like he had any choice in the matter. She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I have a request for you," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of something deeper in it, a seriousness that made Ethan stand up straighter. "There's a situation in the outer sectors of our empire that requires someone with a unique perspective, someone from outside the royal circles. And I believe you are that person." Ethan furrowed his brow, trying to understand what she meant. "A situation?" he asked. "What kind of situation?" Princess Arlia stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. "There are tensions rising between several factions within my empire. It's been going on for years, but now it's starting to escalate. I need someone to investigate the source of these tensions and bring back information. You'll be working with a small team, but your role will be crucial." Ethan blinked. "Wait, you want me to investigate something?" "But I'm just a soldier. I'm not trained for this." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You may not be trained in diplomacy, Ethan, but you've shown something much more valuable: integrity. And in a situation like this, integrity is worth far more than any training." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had never considered himself special. He had always thought of himself as a simple man, doing his job without any real aspirations or ambitions. But now, the princess was asking for his help in something that felt much bigger than him. I don't know if I'm the right person for this," he said, his voice betraying the uncertainty that had taken root inside him. "There must be someone else, someone with more experience, more qualifications." The princess stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I've seen the way you act in difficult situations. You think quickly, you act with compassion. Those are qualities that can't be taught, and they are exactly what I need right now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure what to do with her words. He didn't feel special. He didn't feel like he was someone who could handle a mission like this. But then again, he had no choice. It wasn't as if he could turn her down, not after everything that had already happened. "I'll do it," he said, though the words felt strange coming out of his mouth. Princess Arlia nodded as if she had expected no less. "Good. We leave in 2 days. Be ready." Before he could ask any more questions, she turned away, signaling the end of their conversation. Ethan stood there for a moment, still processing everything she had said. A mission, investigating tensions within the Empire. It sounded like something out of a story, not something he would be involved in. But here he was, agreeing to take on a task he felt completely unprepared for. The days leading up to the mission passed in a blur. Ethan spent his time preparing for what lay ahead, though he wasn't sure what exactly he was preparing for. He wasn't trained for field work or diplomacy. He was a soldier, a simple officer in a vast, complicated galaxy. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't about his training. This was about trust. Princess Arlia trusted him. And despite his doubts, he couldn't help but feel honored by that. When the day of the mission arrived, Ethan found himself standing in front of the royal palace once again, this time with a small group of soldiers and officers. They were assigned to go with him on this mission, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one who had been singled out for something bigger than he understood. As they boarded the royal shuttle, heading toward the outer sectors of the Empire, Ethan tried to calm his nerves. The shuttle was sleek and fast, a far cry from the clunky ships he was used to on Earth. The view from the windows was breathtaking, and he couldn't help but feel small in the vastness of space. But something else gnawed at him, something he couldn't ignore. Princess Arlia had trusted him with this mission, and now he had to prove that he was worthy of that trust. As the shuttle soared through the stars, Ethan's mind raced. What lay ahead? What were the tensions between the factions? And why had the princess chosen him to investigate? There were still so many questions, and he was no closer to an answer. But one thing was certain. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a part of something much larger, and whether he was ready or not, he was about to find out just how much his actions could change the course of the galaxy.